Hello. Today I'd like to talk about the miraculous day that is often mistaken for a crappy day. I say it is miraculous because as soon as we open our eyes, the mind thinks it's running the show. And because the mind thinks it's running the show, it's under all kinds of mistaken ideas. Like, I don't want to get up. I don't want to go to work. I'm tired of this. I don't want to face those problems. Because the mind is actually kind of innocent in this. It's not the mind's fault. The mind has created what's known in Indian culture as a vasana. And it is by far, you have many vasanas. They're bad habits, basically. Bad habits, just habitual things that run us. Okay? And the I vasana is the main one. The mind feeds the I vasana, and the I vasana runs the mind. And so the mind is under the control of this. Some people call it the ego. Whatever you want to call it. It's this I thing, and it starts out, I'm hungry, I'm sick of this, I hate this, I. And before you know it, you're feeding that vasana again, feeding it like a coal engine. And it's running. Think of all the things it doesn't like and how it wants things different. But in the meanwhile, the mind, unknown to itself, because the mind is under the influence of ignorance. It does not know that behind the vasanas, behind the mind, behind everything, that's another topic I'll get to in more detail later, is what's also known as the self. And this is a very good term for it, the self, because it is everything, and it is us. We are the self. Okay? It's just that the self is very, very subtle. It's the most subtle nothing. Some people call it nothingness because that's how subtle it is. It's more subtle than the mind, the vasanas, or anything. So it's very difficult to see, even though it's everywhere and runs through everything, even inanimate objects. Because the self is also known as consciousness or awareness. And when one starts becoming aware of this consciousness, this awareness, it becomes more and more easy to recognize. But I'll get more into that later. I want to talk about this mistaken bad day. So you've empowered this monster that runs you all day, and all you could think about is how you want things differently. And in the meanwhile, the self is behind all of it. It has no agenda. It has no likes or dislikes. It allows everything equally. And it leaves it up to us, to the mind. But the mind is under the influence of this other thing. So the self just waits patiently. And some people, there are all kinds of different ways that people eventually arrive at the self. And once they do, there are no more crappy days. The self lights up the world. The self lights up all of us. So the idea is to shift the control of the mind away from the I Vasana and to the self. Some people call this the true self versus the false self, but I don't like to use those terms because there is only one self. And for most, it is under the influence of ignorance. The poor mind has no idea what it is. It thinks it's this I with all these problems and all these unfulfilled desires, blah, 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 blah. But that's the way it goes. Okay? So, the self, once it's recognized and becomes more and more a part of one's life, you just see how miraculous everything is. That this nothingness this is what we are. It's not an object. So you see, that's another thing, is that it's a total shift in perception. We're going from a dual world of subject-object to a non-dual reality. There is only the self. There's not myself, yourself, his self, herself. There's only one self. And we are all part of that self. But in duality, words are inefficient. So we say a part of the self, but it's impossible to put into words. This goes beyond words. The true self is timeless, eternal. It was never born and it will never die. So guess what the happy news is? You, the real you, was never born and will never die. There was a body that was born. There was a mind that was influenced by a culture and by thoughts. But that's all it is. It is not who you really are. You are beyond that. That's the good news. Personally, I can't see why anyone wouldn't want to grasp their rightful inheritance. But that's up to you, and we'll talk about more of that later. Thanks for listening.